On today's episode, we'll discuss a vital question for today's society. Why is modern mental health care a total disaster? Welcome to this episode of the Coleman Nation. Let's go. So why is modern mental health care a total disaster? Well, let's start with this. Over time, the prescription of pharmaceutical drugs for mental health has been vastly increasing. It's interesting because if they cured anything, these drugs, then people would be at an all-time high of being mentally well. What would a mentally healthy person be? It's funny, we hear quotes like 66% of kids and 83% of adults are on such and such pharmaceutical drug or whatnot. And I'm just making up these numbers and percentages. But such and such percentage of adults are considered clinically depressed or have some sort of disorder. I mean, it's just, you hear these numbers all the time, and that's not the point of this video. My question is, what are the other 22% doing? Why don't we do more of the stuff that is helping those guys? You know, it always seemed interesting to me that if you got a particular problem, look at all the people that don't have that problem and what are the things that they're doing. And that might lead to some sort of solution as to, what are causing people to be mentally well. Well, we've all gone through ups and downs in life and been in situations of depression or acute upset over the loss of family or relationships. These are part and parcel of living life. But the fact is that they're temporary things. Nobody wants to hold on to them. The loss of a loved one is brutally painful. I know that from personal experience. They say, though, that time heals all wounds, but I don't think that it does. I believe that it lessens the effect that that incident has on you as you start to reintegrate into life after something terrible happens. But the more people sit and ponder traumatic events and how they've been affected by them, they wind up owning these events. Honestly, it seems like folks are rewarded for being victims instead of overcoming, moving on, and showing some strength. I mean, I had a situation like this before, and I speak of this, with some personal insight, is that I would be considered tremendously depressed at one point in my life in my mid-20s. And I was just, I just needed to move out of the town that I was in. I went to a farm in central New Hampshire and I completely decompressed for a couple of years. And if you can imagine, like, going through that, like, for that amount of time to get my head on straight, I was going through some pretty, serious personal mental struggles at that time. And, that's a story for a different episode. But the fact of the matter is that during that period of my life, I actually was, I look back over it and I was really going through something where I was trying to own that sort of victim mentality as my own personal identity. And it was only until I had a chance to remove myself from the environment that I was like, wow, I can get over this and I can, begin to move on and heal, right? But when we talk about mental health, I think that what people need is mental strength. How do they deal with stuff? How do they move forward? How do they stop making excuses? How do they find ways to be productive in the face of adversity? These are qualities that I consider to exist in mentally healthy and mentally stable people. Are they contributing? Are they making a positive difference in the world? There's a whole bunch of things like that which are very helpful in defining a mentally well person. I think that 100 years ago, 200 years ago, throughout all of humanity and civilization, you just go back in time, people have been on an emotional roller coaster at one point or another. Good things happen, people are happy. Bad things happen, people are sad. But it's a matter of how do they move themselves around emotionally. As someone who does public speaking for a living, I can confirm that public speakers have the skill to move people around emotionally. They can take them on a journey of emotions. If you're cognizant of where you're starting, where you would like to bring people through, and where you would like them to end, it's interesting that you can have some effect or causality over the emotions of others. Not only that, we can actually control and manage our own emotions. But the fact of the matter is we have a society that encourages people not to manage their emotions and rewards them for not doing so. So let's go through and look at some of the reasons why the mental health industry is a total disaster right now. Well, number one is that there's no clear definition of sanity and no understanding of the mind. I'm going to tell you this right now. We're going to take a second and look up the definition of sanity on Google. And this can begin to give us some insight of why the industry of mental health and wellness is broken. Okay, so this is the definition that people refer to in regards to sanity: the ability to think and behave in a normal and rational manner. Sound mental health. That is so ambiguous and unclear. It's like, who decides what's normal? Who determines what's rational, right? And I'm going to go into this in a little bit, but this is so broad and general. I don't think that it's something that you can create the foundation of an entire science upon, is the ability to think and behave in a normal and rational manner, because that definition of normal and rational could be every single person would have a different definition of normal and rational, right? Because it's based on what? This definition is based on an opinion, not on sort of empirical fact. Okay, so here's another definition. Okay, reasonable and rational behavior. Now, let me talk about this for a second, because what we consider to be reasonable and rational, I think that we would, for 90% of the people that's out there, we would all be on the same page. But I've had a chance to talk to some people over, the last couple of decades of my life, and specifically over the last couple of years. And you're like, the definition of what some people consider to be reasonable and rational is very different from my definition of reasonable and rational. And thereby, because of that, there's a disconnect on the definition of reasonable and rational. We would wind up having some sort of confrontation of, okay, well, who is sane in this situation? Here is an analogy I'm fond of using. 40 or 50 years ago, let's say, it was common for people to, fix their own cars. When I was a kid, me and a bunch of friends in high school decided to change the master cylinder on a 1979 Fiat Bravo. If you're not familiar with what that part is, it's basically, a central part of the braking system of a car. So we went to pick apart, we grabbed, one from another one, and we swapped it into the car. We tested the lines, to make sure the brake system worked. It was a super fun project. But, my point is that most people, they know how a car worked back in the day. In the 70s, you knew how a car worked. You could change the oil, you could change tires. It was a much more simple machine than it is today. Today, cars are so complicated and the subject of car repair is so specialized that I wouldn't even know where to begin. Modern vehicles are managed with diagnostic computers and software and have very, very complex fuel systems. Not to mention, if you're talking about, electric vehicles, forget it, game over. I wouldn't even know what to do, much less begin the process of repairing one. So we're not talking about simple 1970s automobiles. But I bring this up because back then, everybody had a car and understood how they worked. But let's apply that to the analogy of the mind. We could pose the question, does everyone have a mind? And so I think that universally, yes. Now, the condition of that mind, I don't know. That's probably up for debate. But the fact of the matter is that we all are in possession of a mind, right? So, but if your mind is broken, someone needs to be able to fix it. But what happens if the people who are quote unquote fixing it have a monopoly and tell you that it's an unfixable complex machine? The fact is, they have a vested interest, these people, in making sure that nobody understands it, right? Just the way that it is in today's specialty of repairing complex electrical vehicles. They've taken the subject of repair out of the hands of the consumer and put it in the hands of specialists that control everything about it. So they've made sure, in this analogy, they've made sure the people that define what mental health and wellness is and what the mind actually is, they've made sure that they're the only ones who can be consulted in order to be able to, quote unquote, fix the mind. So fixing the mind should be as easy, simple, and universally understood as repairing a car. We all have one, but where do you learn about it? How does it work? When you start looking at some of the texts that are out there, you'll find they're horribly complex. they don't make it a very friendly understanding, right? And the other thing too is that a lot of times you'll see, this recursive sort of language. Well, the mind is something where that is based upon the id, and it's part of the consciousness, and there's the unconscious, the subconscious, and then it goes, well, what are all these things? And they just keep defining the other thing in this big endless circle, which is crazy, right? So there needs to be a simple definition specifically of the word sanity. Why? Because I think that if we can agree upon the definition of the word sanity, then we can start to open up the doors to a sane society. The best definition that I know of comes from the American philosopher L. Ron Hubbard. Okay, he said that the ability to recognize differences, similarities, and identities is what would consider someone sane, right? Is someone who has the ability to recognize differences, similarities, and identities. I want you to let that sink in for a second. If someone cannot consider or ponder the differences between two things, if I said a cat is a dog, right? If I said that an apple is an orange, you would consider that I'm insane, right? If you said, hey, I think that this car is similar to that zebra, you'd be like, that's totally insane, right? And so anyone that cannot have that ability to, differentiate similarities and identities between certain things, that would be someone that was insane, right? They could not recognize differences, similarities, and identities. So there needs to be a very simple universal definition of sanity like the one that I just gave. So in society today, there is no easily comprehensible technology or understanding of the definition of sanity, right? Or of how the mind works. There's no definition that is empirical or objective. So that's number one, right? Is we have to define what is sane, what is considered a sane society. Because I feel like I look at some of the ways that some of the cities are run in this country, and I'm like, that's insane. But you go in and talk to some of the people that live there, and they're perfectly happy, right? And so this is where we begin to break down what the definition of sanity is, and we have to have something that is common ground that we can all apply to everybody. Number two, and we touched upon this a little bit in number one, is the undue influence of big pharma. They don't make money if people aren't depressed. Looking at the top advertisers on every channel, you'll find right near the top is big pharma, right? Companies like AbbVie, and you look around and it's GSK, GlaxoSmithKline. Not long ago, I was looking, you guys may know that I come from the media buying advertising world many years ago. And so I was looking through some of the media kits and some of the press kits about, some of the top advertisers that are out there. And I was scrolling through some stuff on Disney, and Disney Channel has different subsidiaries like A&E, ABC, and ESPN. And their number one advertiser was Pfizer, and I think it's almost become a joke, on Saturday Night Live and in culture in general, that you turn on the TV and there's just every single ad is from Big Pharma. So what are we inundated with every day? I'll tell you right now, I think that for the benefit of someone's mental well-being, paying the money for a YouTube subscription to end advertisements would probably help your mental state tremendously. Why? Because you wouldn't be being served up all of these ads. And I've had it, I've logged into an account that doesn't have a YouTube subscription, and it is just like every time you click on a video, boom, there's another ad for Big Pharma, another ad for Big Pharma, boom, 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 in your face. I mean, obviously things are tailored, but if they were going to default who's got the biggest and deepest pocketbooks, it'd be Big Pharma, right? And so I'm not endorsing, YouTube, but they will serve up ads like crazy. And because of those nearly unlimited pockets, they're just going to dump messages all day long, like happy families. Hey, why don't you take this drug? Oh, do you have a little bit of a tummy ache? Oh, take this drug. Oh, the tummy ache causes rectal bleeding. Oh, here, take this other pill. They're going to cause all of these side effects, and the only fix is more pills, right? This is fairly common knowledge. If you look at the menu of pills taken by most adults and many children in America today, it's unbelievable, the cocktail of pharmaceuticals that most people are walking around. And it just seems to be something that's accepted as the way that things should be. Man, I got to tell you, you wait until the next episode. We've already written it, but there's going to be another episode that's going to be coming up here in the next couple of episodes, and it is going to blow your mind. We're going to go into and uncover sort of the root causes and who specifically were the people and their philosophies that have created the environment and the actual foundation of the failing mental health system. It is going to be an awesome episode. I'm super excited about it. But let's get back to this, right? So it's important to note that the amount of money spent on pharmaceutical advertising here in America is higher than in any other country. And the number of mentally ill people, and we don't, again, even have a clear definition of what that is, but you can observe it in society. The number of people that would be considered insane is higher in America than anywhere else on the planet. In Europe, there are laws against direct-to-consumer drug advertising because people start self-diagnosing, right? When you get into the game of self-diagnosis, you go to your doctor and say, hey, listen, I just saw this ad and I feel this way. Maybe I have some of these symptoms. Big Pharma puts things into people's minds through advertising. Then people go to their doctors, and then Big Pharma incentivizes the doctors to say, well, if that's your symptom, then you should have this. It becomes this pill mill that people get on, and there's no way to get off that treadmill, right? This pill mill that we're talking about. So one of the things that's really alarming to me is the current push by big pharmaceutical companies to get everyone on Ozempic, right? They're saying that some sort of dietary pharmaceutical regimen should be implemented with kids as young as 6. Okay. They're saying they need a lifetime of Ozempic to combat the obesity epidemic. I think this is one of the reasons why RFK Jr. Has been being so brutally attacked in the media, is because the simple solutions that he's talking about is, exercise, sleep, diet, getting outside, sunlight, all of these things cannot be or are not currently monetized. And so do you think that a multi-billion, if not even bordering on multi-trillion-dollar industry isn't going to do everything that they can to combat and attack someone that's trying to, horn in and expose the grift? I think that this is, tremendously telling about how attacked he is, So many times these companies wind up causing the thing that they have the quote unquote cure for. The drug causes another thing, and it's this endless chain of, oh, we caused it, we can fix it. We caused something else, we can fix that too, right? They just keep on going down the line until you're dead because of over-pharmaceuticalization, okay? A standout example can be seen in the miniseries Dope Sick about Purdue Pharma, right, and OxyContin. It was the beginning of the opioid addiction crisis. If you ever have a chance to see that show, you should definitely see it. But this is the question I'll ask you, is do you think that the Sackler family who own Purdue Pharma is the only family guilty of using that kind of distribution structure and philosophy for pharmaceuticals? Regional sales reps, bonuses, and lots of incentives. The reps were sent out to visit doctors, get on their list, give them lots of incentives, trips and cars. Then what happens? These drugs are subsidized by insurance companies and by the government. It's this giant money machine. So part of the mental health crisis is the fact that Big Pharma is writing the rules. You can go back and look at who funded all the studies on sugar being healthy, back in the 60s and 70s. The sugar companies were saying that sugar gives you energy. Who funded all the research on tobacco and the fact that it didn't cause cancer? The tobacco companies. Big Pharma is funding research for its products. If you're a research scientist and they say, we need your research to turn up this particular result, effect, or finding, there are easy ways that you, as a researcher, can move the dial while still, maintaining some semblance of research integrity, right? You can target microscopic case studies, or you can use minimal data sets in order to be able to come up with the results that you need. This is not new. They openly confess to doing it. But the fact is that it's causing people to be mentally ill. Okay, so that's number 2, is the undue influence of Big Pharma on society today. Number 3 is government overreach and control. I'm not going to get too much into that because the things that I will say and, and that I've already said will probably get me banned from YouTube. I'm hoping it won't. But I will tell you that the government has particular programs that are in place in order to be able to make sure that this continues on. I'll give you an example that's really near and dear to my heart. One of the charities that I do a lot of work with and donate to is one that protects foster kids, right? It's one of the many groups of people that, they look out for as sort of a watchdog committee over the, sort of the pharmaceuticalization, especially of foster kids, because they don't have someone that's fighting for them. Foster kids don't have parents. And so what happens is that they become wards of the state. This is common knowledge. You know this, okay? They don't have anyone who looks out for their best interests individually. As a group, you have someone that's sort of their caseworker or something like that. And there's a big machine that says that they're there for the best interests of the children. But when they go into the foster care system, they're commonly diagnosed with depression and all kinds of mental illness. Well, let me ask you a question. Wouldn't you be if you were, part of a home where there was probably a lot of fighting, where there may be, rampant drug use, where you may have, not a lot of opportunity, and then you get torn away from your family, you get put into a state facility, there's all kinds of baggage that comes along with that you just can't get around, right? And so I watched a documentary on YouTube, and I'm pretty sure that it was called Drugging Our Kids, and it was from the Bay Area News Group, okay? I'm shocked at how few views that this documentary has. I mean, it was numbered, I think, in the thousands, but I was like, gosh, everybody needs to see this. It showed the amount of pharmaceutical drugs that have been prescribed to foster kids in the foster care system. Some of these kids were on as many as 20 different psychotropic antidepressant drugs. Can you imagine that you're a little kid that's 6 years old and you have to take 20 pills? You take one pill because you feel you're sad. You take another pill because you're too happy. You take one pill because you can't sleep. You take another pill because you got gas. It's absolutely insane. And then it was literally these little kids, little 5 and 6 year old kids that are just given these massive amounts of pharmaceutical drugs in order to be able to fix their problems. Now, I think that is just crazy, and this is what I'm talking about with government overreach. There's no accountability. If a parent was doing that, they would at least have someone fighting for the kid. If a parent, had someone that's like, hey, you need to take all these, drugs, at least the parent would be there fighting on behalf of the kid. But when you've got 20, 30, or 40 kids under the guidance of a single foster system counselor who's probably already overworked and underpaid, they're like, well, what can we even do? The government comes in cahoots with the pharmaceutical companies and says, hey, let's get these kids on some pills. It'll be the path of least resistance. The foster care system is just one government system, but the same thing happens in many other systems. Another one comes to mind is the military. The military. I saw another documentary. I'll try and find that and post that up, on my notes. But there's another one about the over-medication of our military personnel. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so crazy, because they can't even say anything to fight back, and most of the time, even if they did or were able to, as some people did, over the last few years, most of them are just not even educated to even know that, that there may be some ramifications that they should, and side effects that they should actually understand and know about, and whatever happened to informed consent. Okay. So that's one of the things is overreach. Number 3 is overreach of the government systems and lack of accountability. And again, remember, what's the question? What are the reasons why we have, a mentally ill society? Okay. So number 4 is our failed education system. This is the number 4 reason why I feel that we have, a mentally unwell society, is that we have a failed educational system. The educational system is not designed to educate our kids. Let me repeat that. The educational system of today is not designed to educate our kids. There's been a steady decline in literacy, a steady decline in math scores, and a steady decline in the basic fundamental capabilities of our kids as they finish their prescription of learning, in today's modern educational machine. Okay. A friend of mine in the educational field, said he's going to the colleges. Okay, he's actually on one of the boards, in Southern California. I think it's a national board, and he's one of the people that represents the university in California. And he was talking to me about the fact that there are these huge problems in all of these schools. And he said that he talks to these, administrators and deans and, the heads of these large colleges. And we're talking like Ivy League, some of the biggest schools in the country. And he says the biggest problem they're facing right now is that most of the kids coming to them as high school graduates are barely at a fourth grade reading level. Can you imagine that? That you have kids that are coming in that cannot read, that they are functionally illiterate. How is that possible, right? Go back just to the 80s and people were very literate. They could read. There were literature seminars. There were book clubs. The structure of the educational system was different. I personally liked learning when I was a kid. I thought it was a lot of fun. There were some subjects that I disagreed with, but for the most part, we were immersed in a system where we were challenged to learn. Right now, I was in and out of private schools, just to understand, and I had a combination of public and private school education. However, many times when I returned to public school, right, my literacy level far exceeded that of my colleagues, right, the other students in my class, okay? So my reading level was always a couple of grades ahead of my class, but, it was like, I go, well, why is there such a disparity? I'm not doing anything particularly different. I've got these books, I'm kind of like, I'm in a little bit of a different environment. Well, isn't it up to the Department of Education, to sort of control and dictate a positive learning environment? Shouldn't public schools be in a position where they're actually getting better results, or at least comparable results to private education? When I got to junior high school, I was very lucky to have gone to a self-paced learning school, which was terrific. They said, these are the standards. These are the things that you have to learn in order to graduate. These are all the skill sets that you're going to have. And if you can learn these skills, we'll kick you out of here as quickly as we can. Our goal is to get you out of here with all the skills that you need by 15 years old. And you can start working, you can save it for college or do whatever you want. I was already working by the time that I was 15 years old, and I graduated at the top of my class, right? And so I had a summer job, I had work experience. They had an apprenticeship program that gave me even more work experience. It was coordinated with some of the companies in the local neighborhood that we could go and actually start to establish a work track record, which would be very, very valuable. But every metric our kids are being judged on today, literacy, competence, ability, math, basic living and job skills, is worse today than 30 years ago. Can you imagine that you were thrown into an environment, and we got to walk through this particular scenario very, very carefully. Imagine that you're thrown into an environment as an adult where you're expected to function and you can barely read. You're asked to do math and calculations and go, I don't understand what you're talking about. No matter how often you're shown by the person training you, you always feel inadequate because of, the fact that you are unable to learn because you cannot read. Okay. By the way, this is one of the ways that you can control a society is by making them functionally illiterate. Okay. Yeah, I'm not going to get into even, talking about some of the countries that are out there that do this to their own people, but let's continue. So that inadequacy is one of the main things, in my opinion, that drives mental illness. A person is sitting in a job they're unqualified for, yet they have to somehow figure out how to fake it till they make it. And we're not talking about specialist, fields like engineering, and math, advanced mathematics, genetics, structural work. I'm not even talking about any of those types of things. We're talking about rudimentary jobs in society. Engineers and doctors are suffering the same illiteracy problems even at their level. Every standard in U.S. education has shifted lower and lower over the last 30 to 40 years. What would have been considered a high level of achievement 40 years ago is not even a possible threshold to achieve with today's educational standards. So that's a failed educational system, which is another one of the reasons why we have, in my opinion, a failing mental health epidemic in society. Now, there are possible solutions being discussed. School choice is one. Another, which is another solution, which is fairly controversial, is uprooting and ending the U.S. Department of Education. What has it really done? Nobody wants to end education, but we do want to end the bureaucracy that's causing a decline in the educational abilities of our kids, if that's causing it. And let me tell you, again, the next episode, I'm so excited because we go back to the very roots of the National Education Association and, some of the foundational concepts of what teachers are taught on how to teach in the upcoming episode. Oh my gosh, it's going to blow your minds. But anyway, that's the thing is that, let me ask you a question. If you are responsible for getting rid of the Department of Education, I really want you to think about this. If you were responsible for getting rid of the Department of Education and you knew with 100% resolve that doing so would immediately increase the learning capability, competence, ability, math, and literacy of every single student in America for the next 50 years, would you pull the trigger and get rid of the DOE? Would you pull the trigger and get rid of the Department of Education if you knew that it would result in a remarkable uptick, right, in the ability of our children to function in all of those different areas, right? I would say yes. I would say, look, if that's going to be the end result, I would say yes, but you have to look at that for yourself. Like, would you be willing to pull that trigger, right? And now I'm sure there will be comments about this and we need more funding, but that's the other thing too that I think is sort of an undercurrent of why things are so broken today is how can you say that we need more funding? Funding all by itself does not equal results. I really want you to get this one thing through your head. Is that funding does not equal results, okay? So what we need to do is turn off the endless amounts of money. You know why? People will tell you this right now. You know what'll step up results? Lack of funding will actually step up results. You know why? You take away people and all of the endless supplies of cash and then hold them accountable and force them to get results. Boom. People will start getting educated right away. I can guarantee you that. Okay. So regarding education, these are the types of things that people are thinking about, right? The game we've been playing for too long costs us dearly. I feel bad for the kids that are coming up today. They're taught that they can't do anything about it. The opportunities aren't there. They're exposed to a tremendous amount of drugs, which does what? It disconnects them from reality. Right? Whether it's street drugs or it's pharmaceutical drugs, it disconnects them from reality. They walk around most of the time in a pharmaceutical fog. So these are the things that we need to revert. We need to change the direction that society is going in, and so I'm just giving you some of the points that I think are really worth considering that we need to look at in order to be able to reverse society from, sort of this dwindling spiral that we're caught in right now. So number 5 is bad roots and unsound foundational theories about mental health. The next episode is going to be about this one bullet point is going to be this one topic. This one bullet point is going to be the subject of a completely different episode, right? But the fact is that the foundational theories of mental health are rotten. You have a rotten foundation that everything is built upon. What are we talking about? Let's go back to the basic etymology, the derivation of the word psychology, because psychologists and psychiatrists are the ones in charge. Everyone turns to them to explain mental health. Do you feel like you're depressed? Well, then you should go see a psychologist, right? You should go see a psychiatrist. This is the common thing. And right here, I'll insert that I don't believe that all psychologists and psychiatrists are bad people. Not at all. In fact, I know a bunch of people that, have a background in psychology, that have a background in school psychology, that have a background in psychiatry, right? And I will tell you this right now. I think that many of them enter the field with the desire to help. They're just provided with the wrong methods and faulty technology. But it's remarkable to me that we've gotten to a point where even television shows have to have a staff psychiatrist or psychologist on their writing staff to ensure that it's quote unquote real. For example, I would invite you to watch any season of Grey's Anatomy. I invite you to watch any season of New Amsterdam, right? I invite you to watch, some of these things. Like I remember that this was very prevalent. I think it was in season 4 of Homeland. Okay. I'm not a big TV person. My wife and I, watch an episode here and there of, something that's on. But these ones in particular, I was watching them and it was like a walking advertisement for the pharmaceutical industry. In fact, you could watch any episode of anything on television that was created within, let's say, the last 5 years. And it's like a constant advertisement for Big Pharma right in the script. He's off his meds. How often do you hear that on a show? Or he just, he or she just needs a different mix. They've woven their language into society's fabric so insidiously that you can't even differentiate it anymore. And we're so immune to it. We're so dead to this language that we see all the time that we don't even notice it until someone points it out. Again, I would tell you, especially the last several years, Grey's Anatomy, New Amsterdam. I mean, I don't watch hardly any of the shows. I never watched all of that show. And I don't mean to be critical of the actors that are on it or anything like that, but just listen to the writing and the language. It is very, very evident. But let's go back to the etymology of psychology, to the derivation of the word itself. Psyche and ology. What does psyche mean? It means the soul. Going back to ancient Greek, it means the soul. Ology means the study of. So psychology literally means the study of the soul. However, the first thing that they teach in psychology is that man has no soul. And if you want to challenge me on that, go back and look at the fundamental text of Wilhelm Wundt in the 1860s. Wilhelm Wundt was considered the godfather, right, of modern the modern mental health industry. If you go back to his talks, which form the foundational basis of the entire subject of psychiatry and psychology and psychoanalysis today, is that if you look at that, his basic theory is that free will does not exist and that people are simply a series of stimulus response mechanisms. I'm not even kidding you. This is what his foundational theories were. And this is the person who inspired Pavlov, Freud, all of these modern, psychologists and psychiatrists. His was the foundational research that inspired them. Okay. It was his studies that wound up founding all of their theories upon. Okay. So according to them, a human is simply a stimulus response machine. You ring the bell and they react in a certain way. All these guys who created the foundation of modern psychology with their premise that people have no soul. Can you imagine? Let me put it this way. Can you imagine the entire science you have created or subscribed to is founded on a lie? Now you may say, well, I'm an atheist and I don't believe in the soul. And that's totally fine. But that's something that's worth arguing about, right? Is a human an animal only responding to outside influence or an accumulation of, chemical reactions, or are they a spirit driving a machine? These are the two opposite ends of the spectrum. And for whatever reason, in modern Western society, the foundational tenets of modern psychology are rooted in a falsity, right? Now, you could say, well, I don't believe that it's false. But what if we created an understanding of mental health that has at its primary premise, right, its core, that an individual is a soul, a spiritual being? What if we stayed true to the original, meaning and the original derivation of the word psychology, which is what? The study of the soul, right? Do you know how much that would open the door to creating mentally well people? Because everything that you know about yourself, if you subscribe to the other side, is all focused on the problem. It's not focused on the solution. It's all focused on telling you how small you are and how you can't change. Again, go look at any of these shows that I'm talking about in the last decade where there's someone that's going to a counselor and what are they saying? Oh, you can't change and you can't affect your environment and this is the way that you are and here, take this pill, right? It is really, really insidious how it's entered into the public discourse in this way. So this is what I'm talking about when discussing bad roots. The current foundational theories of modern psychology are founded upon the premise that the soul does not exist and that humans are not spiritual in nature. They also have as a foundational theory that an individual cannot get better or improve their IQ. You are made the way that you are, and the only way that you can change is through pharmaceutical drugs or psychosurgery. Okay. That's insane. Okay. Now, you may go, listen, I subscribe to that. I believe that. But this is all I'm telling you is that there needs to be a dichotomy. There needs to be an opposite to the way that things are today. Okay. Because the fact is that if it were working, no one would complain, but it's not working. Think about this for a second. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, right? Otherwise known as the DSM, the holy scripture of psychological institutions, is literally just made up. The pharmaceutical companies fund the people who make it up. All those people that are on the board, they just literally come up with ideas and then vote them into existence, right? And so the very people that are financed by the pharmaceutical industry are coming up with, they just go in and say, hey, I did this research, right? And I was paid by this pharmaceutical company and, and I have a vested interest. I'm a tenured professor, and coming up with stuff that's going to continue to, make my industry continue to grow. And then they just sit in there and they vote on it. And that's where you get all of your syndromes and maladies and phobias and all that kind of stuff. It's all just voted on by some board of guys that just come in and say, hey, we're just going to add to these every few years. And it's going to wind up opening. I'm going to tell you this right now. The last one, the DSM-5, is just a giant pile of gobbledygook. I can hardly wait to see what DSM-6 is. And every single year it gets bigger and bigger. And you're going to say, oh, well, you brought, no, I have DSM-4, DSM-5 are sitting on my bookshelf at home, right? I've looked at these. I've read through some of the maladies that are in there. And I'm like, dude, this is crazy. This is a crazy book, right? So some research paper studies, a bunch of kids, they name it this or that syndrome. Then they recommend some kind of drug or cocktail of pharmaceuticals. And the pharmaceutical companies are like, hell yeah, DSM is a walking advertisement for all our pharmaceutical drugs that are going to fix these problems, right? Well, the whole mental health field is absolutely broken. It needs to be uprooted, or at least there needs to be another choice. There needs to be something on the other side of the spectrum. And this is where a lot of times religion comes in. Every major religion, from Christianity to, to Islam and all across the boards, at least starts with a fundamental tenet that we're a spiritual nature. We should start with that as the core premise that all mental health is built upon. And even if you're like, I don't believe in the spiritual nature, man, again, I'm an atheist. I believe that the light switch goes on when you're born, and when it goes off, it's done, right? You should at least cherish another point of view on that, because I think it would open the door to like the possibility of being able to fix the situation that we're in as far as the mental instability of society as a whole. That's the opposite end of the spectrum. But even still, it's kind of funny how modern religions have been cut out of the conversation as far as mental health is concerned. That used to be where you would go. You'd be able to alleviate the weight of your soul through confession, repentance, and all these different types of things that don't really exist anymore. Okay, where does someone go to alleviate that pressure? It has been taken away from the church, and it's been moved over into this area of mental health, which is broken. They don't understand the theories of why forgiveness and repentance and responsibility and some of the ways that religion have, been fulfilling that purpose for hundreds of years, right? And so we were kind of like at this crux where something came in, it's broken, right? And so instead, we are told everything we did was wrong, probably someone else's fault. Here's a pill, get on with your life. That's the new system that has supplanted the old system. So number 6 is the corrupted mind of society. Okay, number 6. Again, remember, what's the whole point? Is what is leading to the demise of the mental stability of society. I think that the corrupted mind of society is a very, very big reason why we're in the situation that we're in. Today, there are people who are clinically depressed, upset, and angry. On either side of the political spectrum, you've got people who are angry. But what's the one thing that is making these people angry? It's the corrupted mind of society. And who is in charge of the mind of society, the collective mind of society? Well, for a long time, it's been the media. I heard this great analysis that the media has 2 drivers. Okay, this is really important. One driver of the media is money. It's one of the motivators, okay, of media. And the other is ideology. These are the two great drivers, money and ideology. If you look at how media is structured, a cable news channel like CNN, MSNBC, or Fox, right? They get their revenue from advertising. They want to push their advertising, but they either want money or they want to push ideology. Over the last 8 years, on both sides, they have been primarily not about money because a lot of them are failing financially. I just want you to think about that. These companies, the traditional media companies, are failing financially. MSNBC is up for sale. There's massive amounts of downsizing at CNN, right? There's been just a tremendous amount of collapse that's happening in the mainstream media. And what have they completely gone all in on? What have they completely just said, we're going to push all our chips in on this? The dissemination of ideologies. The result, right? Again, like I said, MSNBC is being sold off. CNN is downsizing, will probably be sold off as well. The entire mainstream media machine is collapsing because they went all in on ideology. They said, we don't really care about the money because if our ideologies don't exist, the money is not going to matter. So if their ideologies don't work, nobody's listening and the money won't matter. So that's basically what's occurred, is that they pushed all their chips in on ideology and now no one is paying attention. So now they can't even get back on track to get the money. The mind of society is being corrupted not only by the media, but also again by big pharma. The thumb of big pharma is everywhere. And not only big pharma, but big agriculture and the military industrial complex. All of these corporate structures exist in order to put their thumbs on the needle of society to move it in the direction that they want. This great quote attributed to Mark Twain. I don't know that Mark Twain actually said it, but it's attributed to him. So if he said it, then great. If he didn't, it's still an awesome quote. But the quote is this: it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. How many times do we know for sure that something is a certain way? I've asked people, if information was presented that was contrary to your current beliefs, would you be open to listening to it and having an additional point of view? I've asked people from every socioeconomic and political area of every spectrum. I've asked that question. If information was presented to you that was contrary to your current beliefs, would you be open to listening to it and having an additional point of view? About half a dozen people have said, no, I would not be open to having an alternative point of view to my political beliefs. I've already made up my mind. I remember one really good friend, hey, can we have a conversation? Nope, I'm not willing to have a conversation. Now, there's probably more, but this is a question I asked, like I said, at least half a dozen people from different political, arenas. And so regardless of, whether what you know is true or false, an unwillingness to even look at an alternative viewpoint than your own automatically puts you in a position where you are ripe for manipulation. Because when you start closing off, and this is a really good point for this channel specifically, and the whole purpose of the Coleman Nation, is that when you start cutting off points of view, you start cutting off, right, yourself from society. You start cutting yourself off from being able to integrate and relate to people outside of your particular echo chamber, right? And what does that do? It makes you very, very ripe for manipulation, and it makes you very, very ripe for radicalization, okay? So society's mind is going through a healing process right now with mainstream media falling apart and the authorities that have previously been deified all being questioned. And I'll throw this in again. I mentioned this earlier, but in this episode, I've harped on everyone from the Department of Education to psychologists and psychiatrists, many of these people who are well-intentioned, right? They're good people who have been given a broken technology and wrong data. It's a wrong data set to consult others on, regarding mental health and mental healing, right? They've just been given a bad set of information. I remember in Spider-Man, what does the Green Goblin say? He says, back to formula, right? I think the whole thing needs to get thrown back to formula. His coworker says, yeah, everything's failed. We need to go back to formula. He goes, back to formula. That picture, if you can imagine that, Willem Dafoe, angry, having to go back to the very beginning and start all over again. I think that's the reaction that you would get from today's current, entrenched mental health institutions, right? They're trying to patch it up with a litany of drugs and consulting based in, atheistic and Marxist principles of the destruction of human nature and the human soul. We have to differentiate between bad people, right, and flawed methodologies. These methodologies aren't helping anyone. So what is the solution? We need to go back to formula. Is there another methodology of sanity and therapy rooted in Eastern philosophy? I know that there is. Alternative technologies of analysis exist that are decades old, even hundreds of years old, right? And I think that this is something that's important to understand. Almost anything should be easy to cure, from any disease or malady, cancer to obesity. How do you do it? What's the cure for most of the diseases that are out there? The way I see it is what I talked about earlier. You don't focus on the 78% that are sick. You focus on the 22% that are not. What is making them mentally strong? I could tell you that it's probably a combination of education, environment, being able to understand mentally and spiritually how you work, being very centered, having good upbringings, good roots, good relationships. It's almost the exact opposite of every one of the points that I went over here today of why we're in a mess with the modern mental health system. If you just practically did the opposite of every single one of the bullet points that I just gave you, you would be in a position where you're much healthier and could count yourself in the upper percentage of happy people. But what we should be doing is analyzing the happy people and figuring out what they're doing instead of studying the people who are unhappy and then trying to smash them with massive amounts of pharmaceutical drugs and shoddy technologies in the area of mental health. Now, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, I'd love to hear it in the comments. I'm sure that I'm going to get torched by some people, right? But these are conversations, in my opinion, that are worth having so that society can move forward as a whole. I should do a whole list of books on mental health, healing, spirituality I've read and found to be the best. But for now, just leave a comment if that's something that you're interested in, right? I'd love to be able to hear some feedback from you guys. If you like the content, make sure that you subscribe, follow us, click the bell, and turn on notifications. And especially on the next episode, I'm telling you, I've done some really, really good research. There's one particular book in mind that really outlines all this stuff. I'm going to talk about it at length, in the next or an upcoming episode. And until then, have a great, rest of your year. I know we're coming in at the end of the year, and we'll see you the next time on the Coleman Nation. Take care, everybody.